Okay, at our first session, I'm here to introduce our speaker, Barbara Simons. Barbara has had a long, distinguished career as a computer scientist. She was at one time the president of the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery, which is the largest professional organization for computer scientists in the world. She is a member of the Board of Advisors of the Election Assistance Commission in Washington, D.C., and she is now the chairman of the board of Verified Voting, and has been for many years, and the founder of Verified Voting. Barbara Simons.
So thank you, everybody. I thought I'd tell a little anecdote about how I got involved with internet voting. In December of 1999, President Clinton asked the National Science Foundation to do a workshop on internet voting. And I was invited as president of ACM to participate in this workshop. That's where I first met Avi Rubin. Ron Rivest was also there, although I already knew him. And I went into this workshop thinking internet voting would be great. You know, you can vote at home from your pajamas, what we always hear. I left the workshop thinking, oh my God, we can't do internet voting. But I just reread the report that we did, and it's really funky. We really didn't know what we were doing. I mean, we knew that there were security issues, but we thought you could maybe vote from a kiosk at the polling place. And David Jefferson just told me that California did a similar study around that time, and they also reached that conclusion, also somewhat erroneously. Can you hear me okay? Oh, sorry. Could you hear me before? Oh, everybody else could hear me. I guess you have hearing problems, Kevin. So anyway, that's not on these slides, but I just, I remembered that this issue dates back to at least December 1999, and it's only gotten worse. So anyway, let's first define what we mean by internet voting. It's the return of a voted ballot over the internet via a web or an email attachment. You can use basically anything that can attach to the internet, personal computer, smartphone, smart tablet. And as other speakers have already said, the secret ballot makes voting hard. That's why we have such trouble, basically, we've had such trouble with this issue, because you can't check with your local election official to see if he or she received your ballot correctly and it was counted correctly, because we care a lot about the secret ballot. Internet voting is unfortunately happening a lot in the United States. 33 states, plus the District of Columbia, allow some form of internet voting, although California, which is where I'm from, at this point allows only fax voting, but faxes tend to go over the internet, so we call it internet voting. There was recently an attempt in California to pass surreptitiously pass an internet voting law, which fortunately we were able to stop. I mean, basically take the internet voting part out of the law, but that's going to come back. So the arguments that are made for internet voting, I should also add that most of the states that allow internet voting do so for overseas voters, UOCAVA voters, primarily civilian and military voters overseas, but some states also allow tribal members living on reservations and voters with disabilities to cast their ballots over the internet. I want to say sending a blank ballot over the internet is not counted as internet voting. I know there are vulnerabilities with that too, but they are a lot less. And that's an area where we've decided to compromise that you can send a blank ballot, you just can't send a voted ballot. So as I said, efforts are being made constantly, currently, to expand internet voting for overseas voters with disabilities. And one of the arguments that we hear a lot is that internet voting will increase voter participation, which it actually does not, as I hope to argue in some of these following slides. So again, I know that most of you probably already know this, but what could happen with internet voting? It can be attacked by anyone from anywhere. That includes nation states, of course. Voters' devices cannot be secured. There is no verifiable record of the voter selection. Fraud can go undetected. A targeted intervention could flip a close race, and we are expecting a lot of close races in this midterm. So that's really something to be concerned about. And even a clean election cannot be verified. So here are some vulnerabilities. Authentication, how can you prove with no doubt that the person who claims to be me who's voting over the internet is actually me and not somebody else, or not not my husband, who's not allowed to vote for me, or whatever. So authentication is very hard. We really don't know how to do it. We don't know how to deal with malware on the voters' devices. And what I've discovered from talking to a lot of people is that a lot of people do not understand something very basic about computers, namely that what you see on the screen when you're trying to do something over the internet may not be what goes out over the internet. People don't understand that computers are basically a set of different components that are connected to each other via various ways. You can attack individual components. And most voters, I think, and this dates back to the days of direct recording electronic devices where the machine stored the results. People trusted them because the machine showed their result on the screen. But we had no way of knowing if that result was what was stored in the memory of the machine. Likewise, we have no way of knowing if what goes out over the internet is what the voter intended. Denial of service attacks are difficult to protect against, especially if they're massive, especially if they're coming from a nation state. You have to worry about penetration attacks on election officials that can change votes. You also have to worry about votes being thrown away, and we cannot audit or recount internet votes. There's no paper trail, and we cannot validate the results. And this is something that should give all of us nightmares. What happens if 6 months after an election in which internet voting occurs, we learn that it was hacked and the wrong people were installed as election officials? I actually spoke about this when British Columbia was looking, when Canada was looking at internet voting, and I raised this question to the panel, to the members of the parliament who were in the session, and they looked at each other. And I think that's when they decided not to do internet voting. And we've seen already what's happened with elections in the United States. If an election has been hacked, it's just going to raise holy hell. It's going to be even worse than what we've seen so far. You can't prove, I guess you might be able to prove that it was hacked. I mean, if the hackers show proof, or if we get proof, you can prove it was hacked. But you can't prove it wasn't hacked. And again, this is a recipe for major social unrest. So this is an old slide. I don't expect you to be able to read it. This dates back about 10 or 15 years ago when I just made a list of some of the major institutions that have been hacked. It includes the White House, JP Morgan, AOL, Google, Symantec, Yahoo, basically everybody. But more recent examples, and what's interesting about these, and this was also true back 10 or 15 years ago, is that frequently when hacks occur, they aren't uncovered right away. So a successful attack may not be discovered for a month or 2 months or even longer after it's occurred. And these recent examples confirm that. So Conduent, the third largest healthcare breach in US history, the attack occurred from October 24 through January 25, but it was not confirmed until June of 26. Likewise, the Department of Homeland Security Information Network, now this is the Department of Homeland Security, they were attacked. And when they first detected it in May, they dismissed it as a false positive, which is also something that often happens. And Accenture, which was confirmed on July 7th, that was where a threat actor actually claimed to have stolen code and so forth, as you can see, including RSA encryption keys. Accenture confirmed the breach and claimed it had no impact on operations. But of course, there's no way to know how accurate that claim is. And Accenture is going to appear again on these slides in a little while. So again, restating the obvious, elections are not adequately funded. They haven't been adequately funded since I started doing this work. So in particular, how can an underfunded, understaffed, under-resourced local election official with little to no computing experience or computer security expertise protect his system or her system in an internet-based attack from well-financed adversaries such as nation states, political operatives, or even rogue hackers? I mean, the idea that people trust these systems and believe that they could be protected, I just find kind of mind-boggling. Regulations for internet voting, none. No independent standards, no independent testing, no government oversight, no legal accountability or ability to recount. The National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, was asked to develop standards, and they produced reports, but they were unable to produce standards. Here are a couple of quotes from them. Technology that is widely deployed today is not able to mitigate many of the threats to casting ballots via the web, and malware on voters' personal computers pose a serious threat that could compromise the security or integrity of the ballots. And there have been several US studies. The national academies, I think this has been referred to in previous talks. The national academies did a study in 2018 in which they said that internet voting should not be used now or in the future unless there are very robust guarantees of security, and currently there is no known technology that guarantees secrecy and security. The US Senate Select Committee on Intelligence in 2019 said states should resist pushes for online voting. CISA, which is the cybersecurity agency of the Department of Homeland Security, which used to be a really good agency but has since been decimated, but back then when they were good, the EAC, the Election Assistance Commission, the FBI, and NIST produced a report in 2020, and they reconfirmed it in 2024, in which they said that internet voting is high risk, and they recommend paper ballots. There have also been international studies. So in 2013, the Canadian province of British Columbia spent $400,000 Canadian, which is, whatever, it was a lot of money, to study it, because again, they were considering it for British Columbia. And this study came up with results that people weren't expecting. They discovered that, and by the way, they were able to do this study because the province of Ontario had been, and still allows municipalities in Ontario to vote over the internet. So they had data. You can't do a study without data, but they had the data, which is unfortunate that they had the data because that meant that this internet voting was happening. But what they discovered was that voters who used the internet likely would have voted anyway. There was no increase with young people voting, and that was a big surprise because everybody was sure that they would find that young people were more likely to do it. And their recommendation is don't implement it for local or provincial government elections at this time. Now, Switzerland had also allowed internet voting for a while, and there was a study done in 2023 where they again found no impact on overall voting and no increase for young voters. But what's additionally surprising was they found the only age group in which there was an increase were voters 80 and over, which again was not what people were expecting. And Switzerland has suspended the use of the system. So one of the things that has bugged me with this work, which has been going on for a long time, is buzzwords. So internet voting has gotten a bad rep. And so, of course, this early one, it didn't have a bad rep yet, but that came later. But there have been a lot of buzzwords that have been used to justify it without calling it what it really is. So the first one that I'm aware of is experiment. So SERV was Secure Internet Voting and Registration Experiment, was built for the Department of Defense Federal Voting Assistance Program and back in 2003, and they were planning to use it for the 2004 primaries and general elections, initially for military voters in 50 countries and 7 states. So they called it an experiment, but they were going to use it for real elections with real ballots that were really going to count. The goal was eventually for all overseas military and civilian voters to use SERV, which would have been at the time about 6 million people. Fortunately, a review group was asked to evaluate SERV. And that's actually where I met David Jefferson. He and I were both on this review group. On January 4th, 2004, a subgroup of us, including Avi Rubin and David Wagner, released a report of potential threats and called for SERV to be shut down. So there were reactions, as there always are to these things. The FBAP said, thanks, but go away. This was an experiment. Just don't worry your pretty heads about it. The authors lack understanding of current absentee voting. The system protections are quite robust. They provide significant capacity to detect and thwart attacks, and they plan to continue the experiment. So interesting things happened. So our report came out in early January. On the 21st of January, the New York Times did an article on our report. I mean, this had never happened before, and can't think of any time since when it's happened at this level, front page. I think it was above the fold in the New York Times. So they contracted Accenture. Remember, they were the ones that I mentioned earlier. And Accenture said that we drew unwarranted conclusions. It was a small, controlled experiment. And Accenture, I think it was Accenture that contacted other reviewers. And so they said 5 out of 6 of them, remember, we were a subgroup. We were actually a minority of the study. So 5 out of the 6 would not recommend shutting down this experiment. The 6th, I happen to know, would have signed on with us, but he was concerned about where he worked. He wasn't able to do it. So it would have been a group of 5 had he been able to sign on. One of the 5 said that our study reflected paranoia of security researchers and disagreed with the report. Anyone who wants to know who that was, I can tell you afterwards. On January 30th, and this just totally blew our minds, there was a memo by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Paul Wolfowitz, forbidding the use of SERV on registration or voting. And this was one of the, certainly that I've been involved with, this was the most exciting win we've ever had. There have been other wins, so I don't want to say that there haven't been important wins, but this was, for me, the one I was involved with, most exciting. Another buzzword, this is sort of a stretch to call it a buzzword, but in Estonia, they're very proud about how wired they are, and they often refer to the country as e-Estonia. And they've been using internet voting since 2005. It's very widely used. In 2014, there was an analysis done by a group of non-Estonian computer security, I think they were all non-Estonians. And they determined that malware could infect the server and voters' systems. Again, this is a repeating pattern. Their report was attacked. The Estonian president claimed the report was fraud, and coincidentally, he was involved with marketing the system to other countries, just coincidentally. And there was a subsequent analysis actually done by Estonians in 2021, looking at 2005 to 2019. And even though they didn't come up with the same conclusions that the first report did, because they didn't, they did say that internet voting complicates running elections because you need to be able to defend systems against attacks, and there's a great variety of them. And again, it does not increase voter participation. And this is a constant theme. And you will hear over and over again that it does increase voter participation from people who are pushing it. Another buzzword, digital vote by mail. This was used in Washington, D.C. in 2010 for overseas military and civilian voters. Again, fortunately in this case, they allowed open testing from September 26th to October 6th. But they were again planning to use it for the 2010 midterms, real elections. The testing, because normally you can't try to break into a real voting system, but because it was a testing system, anyone could cast a ballot, any of us. And so a lot of us did, I did, a bunch of my friends did. And if you voted on October 1st or later, after a couple moments after your ballot has been received, you hear the Michigan fight song, which is actually quite nice. And then we subsequently discovered, big surprise, the system had been hacked by a Michigan team headed by Alex Halderman. They could change already cast ballots and future ones. And furthermore, they actually gained control of the net itself, the network itself. Not just internet voting, but the Washington, D.C. network. And they were able to block attacks or probing coming from China and Iran into the internet. So digital voting was terminated on October 5th, and obviously that was another win, really good win. Another set of buzzwords, private, secure, and verifiable. And this was used in Australia and New South Wales for multiple elections under the term of iVote. So iVote is what they call it, but different vendors have been employed to do it. So in 2011, Everyone Counts was the contractor. They were paid $3.5 million Australian dollars. The election was primarily for voters with visual impairment, so it was for a small group of voters. It was challenged by Vanessa Teague and Ronald Wen. And actually, the company did acknowledge security vulnerabilities during voting. In 2015, the contractor was Seidel. And in that election, which was proprietary and of course uncertified because they're all uncertified and they're essentially all proprietary too, 280,000 votes were cast. And again, Teague, in this case Haldeman, discovered a critical flaw, in particular, that the system was vulnerable to freak attack that could alter voters' choices. So in 2016, Australia had a parliamentary hearing. The Electoral Commission claimed vulnerabilities were minor and criticized the researchers. Yet again, I mean, there are themes that run through all of these stories. And they attempted to get Vanessa Teague fired from her university. And this has happened to several of us. I mean, she's not unique in this respect, where some typically contractor or vendor has been criticized, and their reaction is to try to get whoever's criticizing them fired. In 2021, I vote, and I don't remember who the vendor was, who the contractor was, but I think it was actually local. I think it was homebrewed, but I'm not positive. It was expanded to local elections. It failed on election day. Some registered voters never received credentials. 3 council elections had to be rerun because of close margins. And Vanessa thinks a lot more should have been rerun because there's no way to know if the actual results were correct. But they had to rerun 3 of them because the difference was greater than the number of ballots that weren't received. So they had to rerun 3 of them. It was not used in 2023, but they may try again in 2027. That's not clear. Another buzzword, and we've heard this already in this talk, in this conference, blockchains. Again, people are told that the system is secure because it uses blockchains. West Virginia was used for overseas voters in 2018 primaries and midterms. The Tusk Philanthropies contributed $150,000 to that system. The city and county of Denver, again, military and overseas voters in municipal elections in May 2019. Again, Tusk Philanthropies funded it. So, again, as you probably know, blockchains don't help. If the ballot has been hacked, and it'll be stored in the blockchain, it won't change, but you'll have the wrong result stored in the blockchain. Buggy or hacked software could wrongly record the voters' choices, and there are actually ways to attack blockchain servers if enough agents can gain access, they can control it. It's, again, impossible to validate the voter's ballot. And the National Academy's report in 2018 came out against blockchains. They do not redress the security issues associated with internet voting. Buzzword, mobile voting. You've probably heard this a lot. Vote from my phone. It's not internet voting, right? It's mobile voting. VOATS and Democracy Live have both made this argument. They've both been used to pilot real elections on smartphones, mobile voting. Once again, and I know there's a lot of repetition in these slides, but these things keep on happening over and over and over again. No federal or state certification. VOATS claims they do not need to be certified because they're not a voting system, so they don't tabulate the ballots. They just, receive them and then pass them on, which, that doesn't make any sense. No disclosed source code, and no testing in mock elections. Again, vulnerabilities were found in VOATS, serious security flaws in February 2020. The attacker could alter votes before they were stored in the blockchain. That Michael Spector, who was speaking yesterday, and James Copo, who at the time were MIT graduate students, discovered that these security features can be blocked or disabled. And I just mentioned they're graduate students because a lot of young people are really actively involved in this, and they're doing good work. VOATS attacked the researchers yet again, claimed that their results were false, and they asserted that the pilots conducted had been safe and secure. Fortunately, they were so sure of themselves, they hired a company called Trail of Bits to check the results of the MIT study. And not only did the Trail of Bits confirm what the MIT researchers found, they discovered more flaws. So I guess the moral of the story is if you're going to market this stuff, don't hire anybody who can check it. Another set of buzzwords, it's not an online voting system. That was used by Democracy Live's Omni Ballot. Their website says, quote, always generates a paper ballot for tabulation. What they do is they print out whatever comes over the internet, right? And as you know, that's not voter verified. It's just whatever came over the internet. In 2020, it was used by West Virginia for overseas voters and voters with disabilities. Again, Tusk Philanthropies was funding it. There was an independent security study that found that votes could be altered or misdirected without detection. That was done by MIT and the University of Michigan. Sorry, I don't have everybody's names on this because I was trying to keep the slides from getting super large. Mobile voting funding, the major funder is Bradley Tusk, an Uber entrepreneur. That's where he made his money. And Tusk Philanthropies have funded at least 21 mobile voting projects, which were, again, to reemphasize the same thing, real elections. They have registered lobbies in at least 12 states and DC. And Tusk, again, the recurring theme, claims that the opposition, those who are opposed to what he does, have ulterior motives. And my opinion is he's unwilling to listen to cybersecurity experts. I mean, we've had Ron Rivest try to talk to these people, and they just dismiss him. So this is a really important slide. MOVE, the Military Overseas Voter and Overseas Voter Empowerment Act, was passed in 2009. And the whole idea of passing this bill was to provide a way for overseas voters to securely cast their ballots. So the bill requires states to provide online blank ballots for all overseas voters who request them, at least 45 days in advance of an election. Unfortunately, a lot of military overseas and many overseas voters are unaware of the option. Either they're unaware or they don't realize that the internet voting alternative is so insecure, because an awful lot of them, I would say the majority, certainly the majority of the civilian overseas voters, and military too, tend to cast their ballots over the internet, at least from the figures I've seen from a few states. California is even better. So in California, there's the Uniform Military and Overseas Voters Act, UMOVA, which expands the MOVE Act to all state and local elections, and it even allows local election officials at their discretion to post blank ballots at least 60 days in advance of an election. So anyone from California, you know, especially, basically, all election officials, please, please try to educate your voters about these options. It's so critical, because otherwise their ballots can be attacked in many different ways. So there's also a safe way for voters with disabilities to vote from home, because again, that's another group that's used to justify internet voting. Something called Remote Accessible Vote by Mail, or RAVBM. And basically, it's similar to MOVE. Voters with disabilities can download blank ballots, mark it using their accessible devices from home, print it out and mail it in, or deliver it in whatever way they can to the local election official. Unfortunately, it's provided by fewer than half the states. California and Oregon in particular do provide it, and other states do too, but fewer than half. So again, this is something that should be available throughout the country, but isn't. Now, that doesn't solve all the problems, but if voters with disabilities can get to the polling place, there's always a voting machine there that's available for voters with disabilities. And in many places, election officials will actually bring the technology to like a hospital or an old age home or something like that, where people can vote on the machines directly. So this is just one option, but it's equivalent to the internet voting, so that's why I've included it. And basically, this is the moral of the story. We know how to make our elections secure, and the fact that we have known this probably for at least a decade, and they are still insecure, is, in my opinion, scandalous. And in fact, not only are they still insecure, but there are ongoing efforts being made, even today, to expand insecure voting, namely over the internet. We can make our elections secure, we can deal with all the election denialism, we can deal with all of this. It's a simple formula. Paper ballots, ideally hand-marked, strong chain of custody of those ballots, that's very important. Rigorous post-election ballot audits, risk-limiting audits are really what should be done, but even less than that is better than nothing. But we should be moving to risk-limiting audits. honest election officials, and honestly and truly, I don't know quite how we deal with dishonest election officials because there's a lot of mischief they can do, but we just have to have honest election officials and no internet voting. So that's the point here. If you're interested in more information about internet voting, Verified Voting has a website on internet voting. It's verifiedvoting.org/internet voting. It's pretty easy to find. Just go to verifiedvoting.org. And you probably can't read the text here, but this is Boss Tweed saying, as long as I count the votes, what are you going to do about it, say? So that's, again, the moral of the story. Questions? Josh.
Hey, Barbara. Thank you. We've talked about this before, so you probably know where this is going. Your claim at the beginning that you can't validate the accuracy of an election without a paper trail is demonstrably false. And I believe that it undercuts your other very, very good arguments against internet voting when you include that appealing but easily falsifiable claim.
So you're talking about using crypto to right. So, all right, I should have qualified that. I give you that. However, I think it's the likelihood of people doing this is small. And again, it's more complicated. Really, our election we should try to make them as simple as we possibly can. If not enough people do it, you could still have problems. So I know what you're talking about. It's better than nothing. If you have to do it, it's better than nothing. But ideally, simple elections that people can understand are election people. Yeah. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, really appreciated your presentation. It's so interesting. So on that same thread, how much of the issue with these different voting systems that just completely fall over on their own is incompetence? So if we could perfectly execute on some kind of like technical solution that actually solved the problem, how would you view this issue different?
What, are you saying that the problem is that the vendors are incompetent, and if we had really good vendors, really good software, it would work?
Yeah, or I'm not saying that with certainty. What I'm curious about is how would that change your view of the issue? Because I still see how there are trade-offs, and it's maybe simpler is better. I'm just
Well, I think certainly one of the points I heard made multiple times yesterday is that all software has bugs. I mean, Nat's made that. I mean, I'm sure Josh would agree with that too. All software has bugs. So when you talk about something perfect, that's not in the realm of possibility, really, at least as of now, probably ever. And then there are many other ways of attack, like denial of service attacks. And there's no way you can check that the voter's system is secure. Even if you make the software that the election official has totally correct and totally secure, there are all these other issues that you can't deal with. Yes?
I was just going to ask, so our county, the storage we moved over to Dominion a few years ago. My issue is we moved from paper ballots to electronic voting machines, not online. But it seems like that has sped up and made it faster, but obviously from us hacking all the Dominion machines, it's also created more issues on certification and ability to check. Are you saying that we would all have to go back to paper ballots for you to feel secure?
Well, all I said was paper ballots. I didn't say how they were counted. So I mean, I have no problem using scanners. That's the whole purpose of risk limiting audits, are to check on the scanners. So use the paper ballots to check on the scanners. I think we need scanners, at least for most elections in the United States, because they're so large and complicated. And if we had all hand counting of all the ballots, that would A, take a long time, and B, introduce a lot more errors into the system. You and then you.
I'm one of those 6 million voters who's a U.S. citizen who lives overseas. I live in Mexico. Receiving or returning a ballot by any kind of postal mail is completely impractical. What do you suggest for these 6 million voters, or do you just disenfranchise all of them?
Do you return your ballot 45 days in advance of the election?
I received my ballot 45 days in advance of the election. I vote in Florida, so I have the option, and I use it to return my ballot by fax. And I use an internet upload to fax service because I don't have a fax.
Of course, so it's internet voting.
Yeah.
But if
So what's
you
my alternative?
send it back 45 days in advance when you get it.
That would cost each voter from Mexico about $65 to $75. And in many states, yes, because there is no robust postal service in Mexico, I have to use DHL. And there are many states, many of the U.S. citizens in Mexico vote Texas, which only accepts ballots returned by mail. So it becomes a poll tax.
I mean, look,
I don't challenge your premise. I'm looking for, okay, I'll take your presentation at face value. What's my alternative?
well, I mean, do you ever get to the States? Okay, Mexico, are you sure that if you send regular mail 45 days in advance, and by the way, at least if you vote in some states, it can arrive after Election Day and still be counted. So have you checked to see if a letter you send by a regular mail can arrive within 45 days?
I'm not aware of any scientific study, but
Well, you can do one.
well, there are certainly numerous anecdotes that suggest that that's not going to be at all reliable.
Well, I mean, not everybody, look, another option would be if there was some way for you to submit your ballot to a local, to an official, like an embassy or something, and have them return it. But at this point, I don't know if you want to do that. But in general, that would be another option, which doesn't exist at the moment. But I mean, if your choice is not getting your ballots back in time or using a really insecure system that could be hacked, it's not a good choice.
That I hear.
Kevin.
Yeah. Barbara is chair of verified voting. I'm the vice chair, Kevin Shelley, former Secretary of State of California. I spoke yesterday. And to your point, you can make someday perhaps there will be a secure form of internet. There isn't now. The challenge, I think, is, is there any way at any point to verify that it's secure? Because there's nothing to look at. As Barbara mentioned, printing out a ballot at the end of the internet vote is not a verification of what happened. And then one other point I think is really important, if I may, Barbara. Often people say, well, hey, I can bank online. It's secure. I mean, I do it. Why can't I vote that way? And here's, I think, a really important point people miss. When you bank online, the only individual affected by any problem is yourself. But if you vote online, you're not just affecting your own individual vote, but you could affect the entire outcome of an election. And that's a hugely important distinction.
Yeah, you have to worry about that being used to hack the election officials' machine. Oh, by the way, just in response to the Mexico question again, I was thinking about this. Why don't a group of you get together and mail your ballots together in one package?
Because the ballot has to go to the election official in the jurisdiction.
Okay,
so if you've got 50 states, what is it, over 40?
I see. I thought you were all from the same state. You said you were from Florida.
I vote for Florida. I think it's fair to guess that the majority of U.S. expats living in Mexico, a large percentage of them live or vote in Texas. But they're from all over the United States.
Well, I mean, this is a problem.
Yes, I'm looking for solutions.
Well, you've got it's a very insecure solution, and it has other ramifications. Your ballots could be attacked in some ways I can tell you about after. I don't want to talk about it here, but I'll tell you other risks that you're raising. But yes, I'm sorry, you over here.
Yeah, so we've looked at the integrity of results, the security and the integrity of results, but from another CIA triad perspective on non-repudiation and voter check-in, it seems like a more imminent challenge politically and in terms of the civic challenge here, which is voter check-in and verification of voter rolls at various databases, many cases with the DMV and so forth. In what cases will biometric check-in at polling places constitute a risk versus an advancement in voter checked.
So you're asking if we want if we want biometrics to be used for voter registration for voters to check in?
Assuming paper ballots is the way the security integrity of the vote passed, what's your forecast for the best way to secure the authentication of the voter in the future?
Have the voter sign on at penalty of felony penalty if they're lying. I mean, as somebody who's worked in privacy issues, I would sure as hell not want biometrics to be required for me to vote, for sure. I think that'd be a terrible thing to do. But look, it's a felony. If you go and vote when you're not allowed to, it's a felony. How many people are willing to risk one vote and being charged with felony? It just makes no sense. Yes?
I just want to thank you for your talk.
No, well,
Okay, I just want to say, number one is Switzerland has started internet voting again. So they started last year or 2 years ago with like a few cantons, and now they're growing. Number two, about the Mexican thing. In Albania, all of the postage is paid for by the Albanian government. It costs a lot of money, of course. There are actually FedEx planes landing in Albania with all of the out-of-country votes. And I know this because I've been an election observer in Albania. And number three is, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Estonian system. My job, that is, shameless self.
so that was just a comment, right? Yeah, I saw you.
I realize it's a whole can of worms, but I think one of the biggest problems we have, like literally recently, is trust in the system in general, and people not voting because they don't trust it, and we all know why that is now. Are there any studies being done on how to get the general public, who's not typically inclined to understand that we have systems that do work, that can't be trusted? And in one particular case, I know Microsoft was working on a system where they give you like a QR code. You could go home and you could scan it and say, yes, your vote is counted. We might give people warm fuzzies. Is there anything that we could do to help people trust our system more?
Well, are you talking about our voting system altogether or just internet
Their
voting?
vote counted, when my vote counts, and it was counted, and it contributed.
Well, I agree with you. We need more trust in elections. I completely agree. And I think the more transparency we can introduce into elections, the better. So, for example, states that do post-election ballot audits, it would be nice if there was some way they could make it public so people can observe without the risk of people coming in and attacking the election officials. So you could, for example, televise it or provide some room where they... So I think there are a lot of things that we could be doing, and I think that's a good point to talk about. That's not the purpose of my talk, but I agree. We need to make our elections more trustworthy. We need to educate voters about how elections work. And one thing that a lot of election officials have mentioned to me and others is that when they have election doubters come to them and challenge the results, they urge them to come as poll workers or to come and work with them. And when they do that and they see how it's run, they typically stop challenging it. So basically, if you can bring people into the system, that's another way, I think, to increase trust. Now, you can't do that with all the election deniers. And of course, there are some who you'll never reach because they have a vested interest in election denying. But I think the vast majority of people who question it, that they can be reached, we need to do a better job of educating and making our elections more transparent. I completely agree. David? One more question. No more questions. Oh, I'm sorry.
So curious, what's the relationship between internet voting vendors, which, you know, the slides have sort of given them a negative depiction of their own action, and non-internet voting vendors? Like, are they, you know, what's their relationship? Are they?
I think we've had problems with most of the vendors, especially the really large one, which I won't name, but most of you know who it is, what it is. There's at least one effort where I know the person who's doing it, who's a security person, and is trying to be transparent about what he's doing. But most of the vendors, I mean, think about it. Who's going to write code for an election system vendor? They don't hire the top coders in general. I'm not saying they don't have some good ones, but basically, you know, this is a small market. They don't have a lot of a lot of income because they only sell to states and localities, and only periodically. So it's not going to be an area where you're going to get, in general, I mean, obviously I can't make I can't say for everybody, you're going to get the top coders. So yeah, I think there are problems with almost all the vendors. There are some notable exceptions.
Thank you very much, Barbara.